Hello again. I'm still in my box, my little lockdown box. I have an afternoon off, so this is a rare occasion for me to catch up with some videos. Still reading from In the Midst, a COVID anthology, edited by Sandy Tritt. And I had to choose a couple that I really liked. And I really like this one called Guardian Angels on Motorbikes, fiction, by Catherine Harris. I suppose part of the appeal was she's from the same neck of the woods as I am. She's from Cape Town in South Africa. So I get the whole, South Africans have got a hell of a tenacity and a sense of humor, and we don't take ourselves too seriously. And we have an expression, boer maak 'n plan, which means farmer makes a plan, which pretty much sums us up. We're pretty we're resourceful. And this is a lovely cross-section of that resourcefulness. Guardian Angels on Motorbikes, fiction. You'll be arrested as soon as you try to cross the provincial border. Desperation and anger arose in my throat as I faced this supercilious young policeman. At the third station I'd tried. Each attempt received the same indifferent response. But my mother is ill. See, I have a doctor's letter. She's elderly and living on her own. I need to be with her. I hated my vulnerability and felt burning hot tears despite my best attempt to retain control. The rules are clear. No interprovincial travelling unless you have a death certificate. So my mother has to die before I get to see her? We all identify with this, don't we? It's absolute ridiculousness. I work as a carer, and I could tell you some stories about what this has done to older people. Anyway, on with this and Guardian Angels on Motorbikes. Back home, I replayed this conversation over and over in my mind. What could I do? All main routes out of town had permanent roadblocks, and my landscaping business was not deemed essential, so I didn't have a travel permit. As I stood in my kitchen, looking into my back garden, I watched the gardener brightly sweeping up leaves. His being there was illegal, but he had a family back in Malawi to support, and had pleaded with me to allow him to continue working. Brightly reliably arrived once a week on his trusty blue Yamaha motorbike, which was parked around the back out of sight. Times were tough for everyone at the moment. We were all trying to make it work, and this meant occasionally bending the rules. A small seed of an idea started to form. If I drove the back roads, I could get close to the border. The only way over by car would encounter roadblocks. However, if I could travel off-road, using hiking roads and farm roads, I could get to my mother's house relatively easily. She lived alone about 20 kilometers from the border, in a small rural town. I mulled this over before walking outside with a mug of tea for Brightly. How'd you like to earn some extra money with my opening gambit? I felt guilty for what I was going to propose, knowing it was unlikely Brightly would be able to turn me down. He had a wife and children living back home and was already working illegally here before lockdown. Like many others, Brightly existed on the fringes of society, trying to keep a low profile, while desperately trying to make a living and a better life for himself and his family. He had worked for me for 2 years, and while I knew a bit about him, I had made a conscious effort not to get too involved. I told myself that maintaining a professional distance was the best. After all, I was Brightly's employer, not his friend. Now I was about to cross that line to suit my own needs. I outlined my plan, making light of the dangers and emphasizing the cash payment I was prepared to make. Yes, Mummy, it's no problem, he beamed. So we need to leave later today. Do you need to go home and fetch anything? No, Mummy, I have everything here, he said, indicating his small backpack. I quickly made last-minute preparations. I packed a small backpack of my own with essentials, money, water and snacks, some clothes, basic medical supplies, and a head torch, and ensured my cell phone was fully charged. I pored over a map, trying to remember old hiking routes, memorizing them, but tore the page out just in case. By late afternoon, we'd loaded Brightly's motorbike into the back of my bakkie, securing it as best we could. A bakkie is like a pickup. Before climbing in, I handed Brightly a crisp wad of notes drawn from the ATM that afternoon. I had a last-minute attack of guilt and nerves. Are you sure you're okay helping me? This is dangerous. If we're stopped... I left the sentence hanging. It's no problem, Mummy, he smiled confidently at me, seemingly unconcerned at the journey we were about to undertake, but then his life experience had been vastly different from mine. Yeah, then some. And if you think of all the similar type of stuff that was done under apartheid, different circumstances, but very much the same kind of activities. I calculated we had 3 hours of decent light left, the first 2 of which would be on reasonable roads. Brightly sat in awkward silence up front with me in the cab. I turned on the radio to break the void while trying to concentrate on what lay ahead. We made good time despite using the more circuitous back roads, and traffic was minimal. The last hour before the light faded was hard. We followed rough dirt roads, climbed slightly into the foothills, and skirted farmhouses and isolated hamlets. Travelling parallel to the main highway, we occasionally caught glimpses of it from our elevated position. We passed a few people, mostly workers walking or cycling home at the end of the day. All watched us curiously, taking in the white woman driving with her male companion sitting up front. My company name was clearly visible down the sides, and my plates weren't local. Not much I could do about that. I held my breath every time I saw another car approaching, but we continued without any mishaps. Brightly remained quietly stoic beside me. Light diminished as we reached a narrow valley, and the track petered out. I pulled off the road, bumping over a rocky field into a thicket, and parked behind some trees. I climbed out to check that my bakkie would not be immediately visible to casual passers-by. We offloaded the motorbike. I pointed out the winding hiking path we needed to follow. I could see my breath as the temperature had dropped and the last light of day became a faint smear behind us on the far horizon. Brightly kick-started the bike, and the sound of the engine seemed to amplify and reverberate off the dark valley walls. I awkwardly climbed in, my pack making me feel ungainly. It seemed too late to question the sanity of this journey now. I was committed. "We go?" Brightly asked. Without waiting on my response, he drove off, jolting and bumping down the path, leaving me no option but to grab and hold him tightly around his waist. His jacket smelt of wood smoke and soap. I was aware this was all surreal and would have been unthinkable pre-lockdown, but this was not a time for being socially sensitive. I needed to remain focused on potential obstacles and dangers ahead of us. This next section would be the real test, and I was praying my memory was accurate. In the dark, we approached the river crossing, and I was counting on the fords still being there. I could smell the river and the damp earth. The motorbike lights were not very strong, and our approach down the steep track was too fast. Before I knew it, the bike ploughed into a thick waterlogged reed bank, wheels spinning up mud. After some hard work, we managed to extricate the bike, and Brightly extended his hand to pull me up the bank. We backtracked, attempting to further cross beneath low trees and thick vegetation. "Careful, Mummy," Brightly warned me. I quickly ducked, managing to miss a low branch that would have whipped me off the bike. Stopping for a moment, he turned round to see if I were okay, then nodded silently before continuing across a rocky fording point. Icy water seeped into my shoes before we climbed up the other side. We made slow progress along a narrow path that wound up to a ridge. There were no lights up there. We were truly on our own. At the top, we could see down onto the valley floor below, and the lights of the small town where my mother lived. Over an hour later, making tedious progress, we made it to a small tarred road. The relief at finally seeing my mother was overwhelming. She sat wrapped up warmly in her armchair, her slender frailty, lined face, and shrunken stature a visible reminder of her recent battle. "My word, how on earth did you get here?" she asked. "I'm very fortunate to have a skilled cross-country driver who made sure I made it to you in one piece. I'm forever indebted to him for getting me here," I said, my voice wobbling a bit as the magnitude of it all began to sink in. I introduced Brightly, who clearly felt out of place and embarrassed at all the fuss. I wondered how my elderly mother would react to having a strange Malawian man standing in her living room at this time of night. She didn't miss a beat. "Some of us never get to meet our guardian angels, but I'm so glad I get to meet yours. Now I can thank him personally for getting you here safely to me. Would you be a dear and make us all a cup of tea? I think we need it. This was written by Catherine Harris, who is a freight forwarder by day, a writer by night, mother to 2 teenagers, and an unfit sporadic mountain runner. She lives in Cape Town, South Africa, and cannot wait to see the big open space of the Karoo again once lockdown ends. Yeah, you know, it's fiction, but what I like about it is it really brings out the fact that these types of things, just the barriers between us just dissolve when we need each other, and that can happen in many different guises. But it does show you that those barriers to begin with are just arbitrary, non-existent. They're all in our minds. It's the only place they are. So that's a sobering thought. Yeah, so I'll read a different one next time. Thanks for listening.